In this video, I will unpack multiple aspects of how the giant reticular neuron's functionality presents itself in the central nervous system. Researching the cell was really eye-opening. I hadn't ever known that one type of cell could carry so many functions in it and have so many different sides. Um, if I was prompted to describe the cell in one word, it would be versatile. In Richard Wingate's book, The Story of the Brain in 10.5 Cells, he describes the giant reticular neuron in a personable, characterized way. The giant reticular neuron in the hindbrain, which I named to myself the Chabelle cell, the dendrite sits in a contained space with neighboring dendritic trees stacked up like poker chips. By contrast, the axon spreads far and wide into multiple territories, seemingly insinuating itself like a creeper or a vine throughout the brainstem. Giant reticular neurons are involved in a widespread assortment of responsibilities in the central nervous system. In a general sense, they're responsible for the modulation of arousal, consciousness, as well as motor control. But they're also involved in more specific roles, including muscle tone, arousal, inspiration, pain inhibition, head eye coordination, heart rate, and locomotor recovery. Muscle tone. Giant reticular neurons project to the spinal cord through their formation of the pontine and medullary tracts. The pontine tract is responsible for the excitation of alpha neurons, which are directly in control of skeletal muscle contraction, as well as the excitation of gamma neurons, which work alongside alpha neurons to measure muscle spindle activation. The medullary tract inhibits spinal motor neurons when needed. Wakefulness and arousal. A century searching for the neurons necessary for wakefulness is a meta-analysis that was published in 2022 with the aim of consolidating our understanding of how wakefulness is achieved. Brainstem studies that include Morezi and Magon of 1949 demonstrated that electrical stimulation on the ascending reticular activation system caused immediate wakefulness in cats. Legion studies demonstrated that damage to the midbrain and pontine reticular formation induced coma-like sleep, and damage to the parabranchial nucleus caused prolonged sleep. Stimulative experiments, including optogenetics or light-based activation of neurons, directly impacts biological regions that influence wakefulness. The chemical systems of wakefulness. The main takeaway of this section was that wakefulness isn't controlled by a single structure, but rather a network of interacting neurotransmitter systems. And the clinical applications' main takeaways were that with an in depth understanding of systems involved in wakefulness, we can either inhibit or excite particular systems as a means of treatment. Inspiration. Giant reticular neurons make up the pre-Botzinger complex, which is part of the reticular formation. This is responsible for creating respiratory patterns and measuring CO2 levels in blood. Pain inhibition. The periocuductal gray and rostroventral medulla both contain giant reticular neurons that connect to the dorsal horns of the spinal cord. These systems are known for the secretion of serotonin as a pain reliever and are vital pieces of the endogenous pain control system. Head-eye control. Giant reticular neurons facilitate communication necessary for head-eye coordination and a stable gaze. The paramedian pontine reticular formation is largely involved in horizontal gaze control and the creation of saccades. The mesencephalic reticular formation is largely involved in vertical gaze control. Heart rate. Giant reticular neurons make up the medullary reticular formation, which plays an important role in heart rate. This is comprised of the nucleus ambiguus, which sends parasympathetic signals, as well as the rostral ventrolateral medulla, which sends sympathetic signals to the heart. Giant reticular neurons engage in locomotor recovery. The mesencephalic locomotor region is part of the reticular formation and has the functional task of taking in commands from the brain and turning it into a physical response. The reticulospinal pathways contribute to the locomotor recovery by increasing plasticity when needed. And these are my references. Thank you for listening.